This story centers on a clash between Congress and the State Department. A member of Congress pressed Secretary of State Marco Rubio after a Turkish graduate student lost her visa for writing an opinion piece.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Secretary Rubio, for being here. On March 21st, 2025, the State Department approved the revocation of a student visa for Pramila Jayapal, a Turkish citizen who is a graduate student at Tufts University, apparently simply for writing an op-ed. According to an internal State Department memo, you took this action under your discretionary authority to revoke visas, and soon after you revoked her visa, armed and masked plainclothes officers snatched Ms. Ozturk off the street and transported her to a prison in Louisiana. Mr. Secretary, do you really think that Ms. Ozturk's op-ed results in a foreign policy consequence for the United States?
I believe that case involves someone whose visa we never would have granted had we known ahead of time.
I'm not asking you that question. I'm asking you if you think an op-ed, but that's exactly, in fact, what happened. The State Department wrote a memo concluding that you did not have sufficient grounds to revoke Ms. Ozturk's visa. There was no evidence showing that she had engaged in any activities that were a threat to national security. And in fact, in May, a federal court ordered Ms. Ozturk's release from detention, noting that the sole basis for the government's detention appeared to be the fact that she co-authored this opinion piece in the Tufts newspaper in March of 2024. Where in the Constitution does it say that the Secretary of State can override the First Amendment protections of free speech? Is there a footnote that I missed somewhere?
There's no constitutional right to a student visa.
So, but is there a constitutional right? Does it say somewhere that Marco Rubio gets to determine which speech is appropriate and revoke student visas based on what you think constitutes free speech?
There's a statute that says the Secretary of State gets to determine whether someone is a threat. We deny visas every day all over the world.
Do you think that the Immigration and Nationality Act trumps the Constitution of the United States, Mr. Secretary?
Well, Congress can always change the law if you want, but I'm telling you,
Mr.
while I
Secretary,
have the authority, I will
clear.
continue to revoke the visas of these people that come here to tear
You
this
said that,
country
Mr. Secretary.
apart
Let me
because
reclaim my time because you are talking about revoking student visas based on what somebody says, and that means that you are trumping the legal supreme court, the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution of the United States.
No one has a right to a student visa.
Mr. Rubio, why did the administration need to use masked, armed, unidentified agents to whisk somebody off the street and deny her counsel for almost 24 hours after her arrest?
Well, you'll have to ask the agencies that did that work. I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for revoking the visas of these people that come to tear this country apart.
I'm talking about this particular case where you revoked the student visa of a Turkish citizen who was a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that you didn't like. And suddenly you allowed for masked men to whisk her off the street. And you have multiple jobs, apparently. You're the national security advisor as well. So don't tell me it's not your job who snatches her off the street.
We don't do the snatching, but I can tell you we do the visa revocations.
Let me ask you about the national security consequences of people, masked men on the streets, snatching people off the streets. If these are legitimate law enforcement agents carrying out proper arrests, why are they hiding their identities?
Because then radical crazies will try to hurt them.
So you think that U.S. agents, who have almost always gone without face coverings, even when they're arresting some of the country's most dangerous criminals, suddenly have so much to fear from a graduate student who wrote an op-ed that they need to be masked? Is that
that law student was a guest in the United States on a student visa. No one's entitled to a student visa.
So you revoked her student visa based on an op-ed which trumps the supreme law of the land, which is the Constitution.
Someone's coming up here to stir up problems on our campus. We're going to revoke their visa.
She didn't do any of that. She wrote an op-ed. She wrote an op-ed, and I'm talking to you about her particular case.
Claims and your claims. Those are not the facts.
Reclaiming my time, you revoked her student visa because she
proudly.
wrote an op-ed.
Would you revoke? We're going to do more.
I have another question for you. Would you revoke the visa of someone in the United States who published claims that, quote, Jews are an untrustworthy and dangerous group? Yes or no?
We will revoke the visa of anyone who's in this country as a guest
Are
who's here
you
to stir up
going to
trouble.
revoke the visa of somebody who made
Send me the case. I'll look at it. I'm looking to get crazy people out of our country.
Actually, it's not just about revoking. You actually, Secretary Rubio, excuse me, reclaiming my time. Can you explain to me why the Trump administration granted refugee status to Charles Kleinhaus, the white Afrikaner who tweeted that exact statement that I just said? There's the case.
That's not a visa.
You granted that person to enter the United States.
That's someone that applied here through a totally different process.
Secretary Rubio,
visas are a privilege.
Secretary
we deny
Rubio,
them all the time, and
you
we'll revoke
revoked
them.
a visa based on an op-ed, and then you allowed for masked men to snatch somebody off the street.
Your time's expired.
Soon after, masked agents detained her, and she was denied immediate access to a lawyer. The question is whether this was a routine immigration decision or a violation of free speech rights. For more coverage that connects the dots, subscribe to the channel. To understand what happened, you need the legal backdrop. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, the State Department can revoke visas at its discretion, and courts usually do not step in when those decisions happen overseas. But once someone is living inside the United States, punishing them for what they say brings First Amendment issues into play. That is why this case alarms legal experts. For more legal context made simple, subscribe today. The manner of detention adds another layer. Typically, immigration arrests are handled by federal officers who do not conceal their identities. In this case, masked men carried out the arrest, raising concerns about transparency and proportionality. Officials argue this protects agents from retaliation, while critics see it as excessive when the target was a student whose main action was publishing an op-ed. For more insight into how enforcement works, subscribe to stay informed. The larger debate is about free speech versus government discretion. Supporters of the Secretary's decision point out that visas are privileges, not rights, and can be revoked if the government believes someone is a threat. Critics argue that stripping a visa over an opinion piece crosses the line into punishing protected expression. A federal court later ordered the student's release, saying the government had insufficient grounds. For balanced reporting on issues like this, subscribe for future updates. Questions of consistency also matter. Lawmakers asked whether similar action would be taken against people who publish hate speech, and why other applicants with controversial statements have received asylum or refugee status. Different categories of immigration have different standards, but the concern is whether the government applies its rules fairly. For more comparisons across immigration policy, subscribe to the channel. Looking forward, the key oversight questions remain. What evidence specifically justified the visa revocation? Why did officers need to be masked? Was due process fully respected? And how does the government separate controversial speech from actual threats? The answers could shape the future balance between immigration control and constitutional values. For continuing analysis on these critical questions, subscribe and stay tuned.